Welcome to Diary of a History Teacher. Today, I'm starting a brand new series on my channel called Lectures I Wish I Could Give in Class. Today's lecture that we're starting off with is Technofeudalism, a new economic system that is designed to take over and change the United States of America. Now, whenever I'm in class, we always start with key terms or definitions of very important words that we're going to go over in class multiple times. I always like to start with the key terms and definitions because it's a great way to get our mind thinking about what we're about to start learning about, as well as expand our knowledge on very complex words that you'll see in class. So what we're going to be seeing is obviously the title of the lecture, which is Technofeudalism, a system where tech platforms act as digital landlords, extracting wealth through control rather than through production. This is going to become very important when we get into the nitty-gritty of the topic throughout the lesson. Rentier capitalism. This is profit-owning assets that don't really produce goods or services. Think how traditional capitalism is. You make a product, you sell a product, you have a service, and you sell that service. Rentier capitalism is where you just own things and you make money based on your ability to own things. So whatever you're owning is then making the money. You are not really making anything or selling anything. You're just owning, and that ownership creates wealth for you as the owner of that asset. Financialization. This is the shift that our economy has made beginning in the 1970s and 80s, where we are starting to see very important key sectors in our economy, banks and private equity, start to make money via production you make money from financial engineering, whether you are selling a mortgage-backed security or you're selling some sort of, you're a private equity firm and you're buying up assets and you're not really selling anything. You're just owning the means of production. So that is, financialization is the big backdrop behind why we now have this rentier capitalism that we saw on the last point. Next is platform monopolies, where we have these very large tech giants that are essentially becoming a monopoly, where they own and control a very large portion of the economy and sort of stifles out any sort of competition. Whenever my students ask, hey, mister, if I go search something, they really say, should I Google it? They don't really say Bing, which is the old Microsoft version of Google, or there's Firefox, or there's Safari, there's these different web platforms, but really all of them use Google, or 90% of the people in the world use Google whenever they're searching something on the internet. And lastly, we have technostructure. This is a corporate bureaucracy that is shaping our values in society. It is these corporations that have these large managerial firms that work for them or that they have underneath their belts that are creating some sort of advertising or creating some sort of class of people that we call the professional managerial class, the PMG or PMC. All right, so let's move forward and let's talk about digital surveillance. I have a clicker in my hand, I should have just done that. Digital surveillance refers to the use of technology to monitor people's behavior, communications, and locations. The most common tool for digital surveillance is going to be cell phones and laptops. The very technology that nearly every single person in the United States has, or nearly every single person in the Western world has, some sort of technological device that allows them to connect to the World Wide Web, and our governments using the leverage behind these tech platforms like Apple, like Facebook, like Google, are using a person's ability to navigate these platforms and apps and collecting data on that person, creating some sort of profile, and therefore either sending them advertisements, which is what we're used to, or what we're turning into is a society where the government is using these tech platforms, these technologies, to collect data on us and determine whether or not right now that this person is an immigrant or a non-immigrant, or in the future communist and socialist, as well as someone on the left side of the political spectrum. We are seeing this in real time in the United States as of October 2025 with the passage of this executive action by the President of the United States that allows them to deem certain groups of people as domestic terrorists, creating some sort of profile that this person has to subscribe under, and they use that to cross over to what are they doing on their cellular devices, what apps are they frequenting, what videos are they liking, what posts are they reposting, and using that to create some sort of leverage as to warrant an arrest, warrant a detainment, warrant a deportation. Moving forward, so it is important for us to know where we are in our society as of 2025. Right now, capitalism is no more. We have very, very large tech giants. You can see here literally looking like these royals in medieval feudalistic societies. And this book, Technofeudalism, is arguing that capitalism is now transformed into techno-feudalism. And we'll dig into really what the meat and potatoes of this word actually means. But what we need to know is that power in our system, in our society, is not from the government. Yes, the government wields power. Yes, the government is extremely powerful. But you have to look behind the government, behind the actions, and who these actions that the government is taking really for. And it is for these tech companies. These companies of Amazon, Google, Meta, Uber, Apple, they hold the real power. And if you've taken any sort of basic government and civics class, you know that such as lobbying, and that these tech giants are very important for lobbying members of Congress to pass bills to law, as well as, most obviously, the President of the United States. The people in the government in power gained their power through the donations and the lobbying from these tech companies. And these tech companies flow from the ownership of these platforms, not from factories on a piece of land. Yes, they have offices spread throughout the United States and Europe, but also this power comes from the land that we call our phone. Our attention that we give these tech companies gives them more money in their pocket, and therefore gives them more power in our society. So, we need to talk about surveillance, because these tech companies are working lockstep, hand in hand with the governments in the 50 states, as well as the government headquartered in Washington, D.C. that we call the federal government. And starting in 2001, after 9/11, September 11, 2001, the United States passed the Patriot Act. It had bipartisan support in Congress, and this new law, really it's an old law, it's 24 years old at this time, allows the government to collect data on our personal information without a warrant. And they work with these various phone companies such as Verizon and AT&T to collect text messaging as well as phone call data, as well as these tech platforms like Gmail or Google, YouTube, Facebook, and various other tech platforms that allows them to collect data on Americans and just people in this country. So let's step back. Let's go ahead and start thinking backward of how did we really get here, and looking at the economic landscape of this land, of the United States, and where our origins come from in Europe, and how did we get to where we are in 2025. So beginning all the way back into the medieval era, we have feudalism, where we have a plot of land, size of a city, controlled by a king. And the king owns this land. You can call it a city. You can call it the name of a state. For example, in England, you have the land of Saxony. And the king on that land uses his ownership and wealth to distribute this ownership over to various lords or duchies or dukes. And these new lords that work for the king are then forcing these serfs or these peasants to work the land. You have owners of the land forcing the people at the bottom to work the land, whether they're tilling for food, whether they have the domestication of animals, or various extracting resources of getting coal or steel or iron out of the ground. So the government, or not the government, the king who creates the government in their state or city is the king, the owner of all the land. And we have lords that own various sections of that land, who therefore then own the serfs that work onto that land. That is feudalism, where the landowners own the land and rule everything on that land. Starting in the 1700s with Adam Smith's creation of a new system that we call capitalism. And essentially what capitalism is, instead of having a king own the land, you have the landowner become now the factory owners. Whether they own the factories or own the farms or own the various mines. They own the land and they hire people and pay people to work for them. Whether it is making a product in a factory or working the land or working in a mine. Yes, at the foundation of capitalism, we still do have slavery, which is similar to serfdom. However, the conditions, the treatment of slaves is completely different. There is no such thing as a freedom when you are a slave. There is some sort of freedom when you are a serf. Whether you have your own home, you own some sort of small plot of land that you work, and therefore you send it up to the Lord. Slaves have no freedom whatsoever. And eventually, as time progresses with capitalism, slavery is abolished in the United States, serfdom abolished in Russia, circa the 1860s in both places. But now, middle of the 19th century, early 20th century, we have capitalism coming towards its peak. And we are now moving into Technofeudalism. And let's just go ahead and zoom into our slideshow on this graphic here. So looking over at medieval feudalism versus corporate / technofeudalism. We have the very, at the very bottom, everyone is at the very bottom. Almost everybody that exists in a monarchical medieval society, peasants, laborers, are at the very bottom. And moving up the chain, we have vassals, or officers, or farmers. And moving up, we have merchants, which are traders or explorers, royal ministers, or chancellors, or sheriffs. We have the clergy, people that work for the church, archbishops and priests. We have the landed gentry, these are your dukes and barons, the lords that control the plots of land, and they gain it from the monarchs, whether they are the kings, the queens, or the emperors. This is how society functioned for nearly 1,000 years or more, give or take. Switching over to our modern society, we have everyone at the very bottom, workers, soldiers, students. Above them are professionals, these are your doctors, these are your clergy, these are your entertainers. We have bureaucrats, these are your judges, your secretaries, working at lower level offices. Then you have your elected officials, these are your presidents, these are your members of Congress, these are your representatives that represent you in the states or in Congress. We have our corporate elite, these are our billionaires, these are our Fortune 500s. Above them are the big bankers, the people that own and control the wealth in society. This is your JP Morgan, the Goldman Sachs. These are the families that own the very largest banks in the United States. And at the very, very top is your central bankers. What is your Bank of Japan, your Federal Reserve System. These people literally hold the levers of power. Why is it so important that the Federal Reserve meets and changes interest rates that impact you and I? How does that happen and how does that work? It comes from these people at the very, very top. Moving forward, so how do these mutations really work? Zoomed in, starting in the 1970s. First, we have the Bretton Woods Agreement. This, initiated by President Richard Nixon, pushes for the American dollar to be untethered from gold. We have the gold standard in the United States. First it was the silver standard, and then both the silver and the gold, and then the gold standard. The gold standard says how much gold you have in your country equals how much the dollar is worth. You exchange your dollar for how much gold is monitored and controlled by the United States Bank. But in 1971, Richard Nixon, with the Bretton Woods Agreement, now literally separates the dollar and gold, which makes the dollar backed by trust. How much I believe the dollar really works, or how much worths. And that agreement changes our economy to what we now see today. How does this work? Well, private equity, beginning in the 1980s, starts buying up small businesses. Till we see today where the largest private equity firms of State Street and Vanguard are now buying up multi-state or multinational companies, swapping people out and exchanging them for new people, lowering the quality of the service, lowering the quality of whether it's for food. I'm thinking of Jersey Mike's and how that just passed earlier this year in 2025 to BlackRock, where we're starting to see lesser quality food, we're starting to see lesser people on shift, and so on. And I'll get into some examples in a little bit. And then in 2008, we have the financial crisis, where we are seeing these big banks failed by passing out mortgage-backed security loans towards risky bets on whether this person can make their mortgage or not, selling higher homes to poorer people, and we see the crisis crash, Barack Obama coming in, stepping in, sending out billions of dollars towards the big banks and the bailout for these rentiers. And now we're moving into what's the author of the book Technofeudalism calls cloud capitalism, where these platforms are now replacing banks. So the Bretton Woods Agreement, there we go, establishes this new financialization system and ends the gold standard, and now debt becomes a commodity, where debt can actually help you move up in society when you accumulate debt and instead of paying off your debts. And these banks profit from some sort of complex system by sending out these loans towards people, whether it's auto loans, home loans, and allowing them to borrow money from other areas. Now imagine, it blows people's minds that your bank doesn't actually hold your money in cash for you. So if you go to the bank, you say, hey, can I get my $5,000? They are more than likely to have that $5,000 on hand. But in reality, if you go to bank and you have millions of dollars, millions and millions of dollars, and you go and you say, hey, let me just take out all of my money, my $7.8 billion in cash. The bank will literally fail because they don't have that legit cash, paper cash, or even gold on hand to give it to you, as well as if everybody else in the country starts saying, hey, can I have my money? Can I have my money? Can I have my money? They have these complex systems of constantly moving money around so that they can make these loans or give these people these checks or these other sorts of loans that they might need. This is called rent-seeking. Actually, no, it's not. No, it's not. Rent-seeking behavior comes in later. So, private equity. Where does private equity come into play when it comes to the role in technofeudalism? Well, private equity is these large companies, these multi-billion or even $1 trillion company that exists with the sole purpose of buying up other companies, stripping their assets, replacing them with cheaper stuff to make more of a profit. So, I have an example. A private equity firm buys up a nursing home, and this nursing home with borrowed money is loading the company with a lot of that. They buy it up with borrowed money, and now they have accumulated a lot of debt. In order for them to pay off this debt, they start cutting staff. They're reducing their quality of care. And it cuts essential services to maximize the amount of money that this nursing home will make when they have patients in their home. It's selling off legit real estate. They might close down a building, or the building is then leased back up at a higher price so that they can strip it from all it's worth because they own it as an asset, and therefore turning it into a very profitable company. Should a nursing home work for profit? You will probably say no, because a nursing home should have the purpose of now they have very important role of taking care of these people. They have this role of taking care of as many people as possible so that these people can live longer lives or happier lives or more fulfilled lives. But private equity doesn't care about that. They care about the money in their pocket. So let's strip it for all it's worth. They might even fire people. Or they might make the conditions so bad for the worker to then therefore make the worker quit on their own volition. Private equity is extracting the value of these companies, and they are making our lives more difficult to navigate. At the very simple example of the nursing home will collapse because they own the private equity firm all of this money that they need to pay in higher rents of the building or higher costs of the machinery that they need to buy for. And the people that work the job suffer because they quit their job and they have to go find a lower wage job or a different job or move homes and have to spend even more money because of this process. The people that live there, the residents, the patients, suffer even more because their care quality is even worse, or they're not being seen as often because of the lower staff. But at the end of the day, even though the people at the very, very bottom, the patients and the workers, are suffering the most, who benefits? The private equity firm that raised the costs, also raise their profits. They walk home with more cash. However, us at the bottom are suffering even more. This is not capitalism. Capitalism, yes, at its bare minimum is making profits at the end of the day. But private equity buys, acquires, and invests in various companies, and they make a buck because they're stripping their assets away. Instead of them owning a product, owning a service, and making sure that that service is making the money itself. Not keeping everything the same, but at the front end, whether it is, actually it's not that. Never mind, forget that. So, there is no value created with private equity firms in the picture. Capitalism rewards innovation and production. Think of Ford building and manufacturing cars and selling these cars. Private equity destroys businesses to extract the wealth. Think like a medieval feudal lord extracting the wealth from their peasants by taxing them. And the peasants have zero say because they don't get to elect their politicians, they don't get to elect their lords, they don't get to elect their kings. They're just having to suffer and deal with, I guess the king wants more taxes, so therefore I have to give them more of my money. They're taking more away from us. This is called rentier behavior, where private equity firms' profits come from the ownership and financial engineering, not improving the business. think how the costs of Netflix increase over the various years from $20 to now $35. What has changed with Netflix? Have the movies gotten better? Have they made more movies? How about the physical infrastructure, the platforms that we use it on, the technology that we use, or the various buildings and data centers that they have to store these movies in? Do those cost more money? No. They just increase the costs because that is the way they design the system and they're following along, and here we are having to deal with it. Yes, okay, Netflix, you said you want to increase the cost of your movie service? Fine, take more of our money because we are used to saying take more of our money. Just as much as, for example, Amazon extracts fees from sellers, private equity firms extract wealth from various companies that they own, leaving out these hollow shells that we call whatever company it is. Private equity firm is a microcosm of technofeudalism. Wealth flows upward, while workers at the bottom and the communities that they live in are suffering from the costs of worse quality food, terrible services. There needs to be reform. We need to break this cycle. I don't see it happening anytime soon. I see the system that we call the United States collapsing under its feet. And whatever replaces it will need to address this system head on. Because this is the root of the problem. This is why we are in the way that we are. We're living in this world the way that it is. Moving forward, 2008 crisis. This pivot to these technology companies are happening post-2008. Facebook, Google, Netflix blow up in the 2010s due to the shifting of our money in the economy, flowing from interpersonal services to tech services. Uber, Airbnb are examples of this because now these tech companies, Airbnb and Uber, have no physical infrastructure. There's no physical infrastructure such as them owning the literal cars that they are driving, Airbnb owning the literal houses. No, they work with these individuals that see this as an opportunity to make a buck or two. Normal people that want to rent out in a spare bedroom or rent out their home on the weekends because they travel for work, or they finish work and they're Ubering to make an extra buck. Airbnb and Uber do not own physical services. They allow these people to work on this tech platform that gives other people the opportunity to use it as a service. But at the end of the day, Airbnb is just a place for people to say, hey, come rent out my home for a day. Or Uber to say, let me take you from one place to another. That is a human-centered way, but they took out the humanity and stripped it towards a gig economy, where people are now working extra hours to make ends meet, and they see this as an opportunity to allow people to therefore use their gig labor or gig housing as the new actual service to provide. Not hotels, not taxis, but a different era that we're moving into. See this picture in the background? When was it taken? If you said Inauguration Day, January 2025 for President Trump, you'd be correct. But these people in the background are the largest owners in our society. They have the most wealth under their name than any other human in society. And what do they work for? Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook, Jeff Bezos with Amazon. I don't know you, but you work for Google, I know that for sure. I don't know your name. But these are the new lords in our society. These people own the platforms that we use every single day. This digital infrastructure is called cloud capitalism. They don't own physical capital that we're used to thinking. That we're used to thinking with capital being the means of production, the factory, the workers, the products, the raw materials. No, they own the platform. They own the service that they are providing, the service that we deem to be necessary in our lives, that we use to communicate every single day. They use this as their new source of economic power. Our ability to navigate these platforms every single day gives them more money in their pockets, and the more money that they have is more influence in our society that they will be putting upon us. So, rentier's system versus a profit system. We are used to thinking as capitalism as a profiting system, where their product is so good that they deserve the money because it gives me value. I go to the store, and I'm a teacher, so I love Expo markers to write on the whiteboard. So I go to the store and I buy Expo markers. Expo gets that money as profit, and they use that profit to make their business better, to make more products, to hire more people. However, now we have Facebook and their monopoly as a renting system. How does Facebook make money? Advertisements. They allow people to use their platform, and they make money on that platform every single time people click on advertisements and use those advertisements. They are giving these people a rent, saying every single time you want to put an ad, you have to pay every single time. And this, there is no difference now, because the amount of money that is left over once costs are paid for, the difference is subtler, qualitative, and almost abstract. Profit is vulnerable, and there is no market competition. Rent is not. Rent has no competition. You are forcing this to happen because you are a monopoly. You own Facebook. If Facebook was broken up into their various different platforms, whether it is your posting, whether it is your advertisements, whether it's your Facebook marketplace, your messaging, all of this combined into one app is allowing Facebook to, and even with Instagram, because they own Instagram, they are creating this world of, we are the dominant app. We are what you use every single day. We control and not control what you're allowed to post, how you're allowed to communicate, how much money you have to pay in order to use the platform as a business. The monopoly that these companies have is their dominance. Like I said earlier, Google is 90% what we use to search. That is a monopoly. Facebook has no real rival. I ask my students, what do you rather like to use, Facebook or TikTok? And the split is very, very even. But Facebook has more users, more money under its belt, as well as more influence in our society because of those two. I'm going to skip this one. I want to end with this. A quote from Yanis Varoufakis, who wrote the book Technofeudalism. And this comes from his book. He says, in the 18th century, it was land that the many were denied access to. In the 21st century, it is access to our own identity. Because I have to use these platforms, where does my identity come from? Do I create my identity? Do I allow others to create my identity for them? With this constant communication among these people on these platforms. No, don't jump up here. Don't jump up here. All right, my cat's gonna jump on my computer. These tech platforms have now monopolized our society, and is forcing us to conform to the group instead of creating our own individualistic identity. I'm now a gig worker. I'm now pushed down by the powers that be, the people that are far, far above us, that are controlling our economy. They're extracting my wealth, and I have nothing to do with my money nor my time. So, how do we get out of this? This, I actually created a few months ago. Me and my friends gave a lecture night, little lecture series where we gave lectures to each other, and this was what I created. This was back in April, I believe, when we did this. I did not see us heading down this path of fascistic behavior by the American government, no. But if the world was different, what could we do to change it? First is to change the platforms itself. These platforms should not be owned by these oligarchs, by these feudal lords, these techno-feudal lords, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. No, these tech platforms should be publicly owned. Public ownership gives greater freedom of speech, gives greater democratization on the platform, allows people to organize on the platform, as well as strips it from its profit or rent-seeking behaviors. We can have worker-run apps, cooperatives. I know here in Denver there's a worker-run Uber-like company where the workers own the app and the workers make more money. The not the Ubers, but the drivers, they make more of a profit themselves because they work together and there's no person at the top that they're sending their wealth to. Thank you. This is it. This was long, but this is one of my favorite topics that I love to learn about. If I missed anything, if I misspoke, if I made a mistake, if I said anything that might have been contrary to popular belief, please call me out and correct me on that. I am just starting this lecture series. I'm trying to make more of these. I'm trying to make it more fun and more interesting. Stuff that I wish I could teach in my classroom, but because I can't push my political beliefs on my students, I'm going to use this as a platform to not push my political beliefs, but be able to share my political beliefs, or at least political ideas of how I think society should be run. I love studying history, civics, government. I teach it every single day in my school, and I wish I had more time to teach other things. And if you enjoyed this, hit like, hit subscribe. I want to do more of this, and I feel like if you hit subscribe, you'll get more of my content. My goal is to get to 50 subscribers. I know that's a very small number, but my goal is to get to 50 subscribers, and if I get to 50, we'll shoot for 100 subscribers. That's very little, but in the grand scheme of things, but I think we can do it. All you gotta do is click subscribe and help support me out. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you made it all the way to the end, do all the things, and I'll see you next time.